Greetings and welcome to the final presentation of HON 470. Number 1, evaluate the ethical violations that were the most problematic or evident. In evaluating Jim Jones, one does not need to spend a huge amount of time searching for issues to find ethical problems, chief among which is child abuse. Jim Jones once forced teens to slosh through icy waters as part of his teen survival training camp and bragged to the teens that he once forced a small boy to eat his own vomit after the child threw up at the dinner table. When the child threw up again, Jim Jones once again forced him to eat his own vomit like an animal. However, that was not the only atrocity committed by Jim Jones, as he once had a 16-year-old girl stripped and paddled 75 times in front of his entire congregation for the mere crime of hugging her friend, who Jim Jones had branded as a traitor to the church. These incidents leave one to conclude that Jim Jones was a sadist with a particular fetish for abusing those under his control, especially children. The second ethical issue with Jim Jones is his general manipulation of his followers, who he gave doses of mental and physical abuse in turn. Jones not only isolated his cult in South America after he fled scandals in the United States, but sought to publicly humiliate his members to break them down further by forcing them to strip naked in front of the entire group and undergo mass criticism. This ended with Jones putting his arm around the individual and telling them that what happened was a good thing because it helped their cause and let him trust them more after they accepted the discipline. Physically, Jones abused his followers by forcing them to undergo malnutrition and sleep deprivation, as people are far less willing to fight or escape when they are tired and hungry. For those who did escape Jones' grasp, they could not travel as far when they were malnourished, and sleep deprived as they could when their strength was higher and their sleep was better. Another physical form of punishment, aside from the paddling abuse, was the box. The box was a punishment administered by Jones where people were forced into a coffin-shaped box and kept underground, while they were constantly berated and reprimanded for their perceived slights against the cult. According to one former cult member, Deborah Layton Blakely, one gentleman who spoke out against the concentration camp-like living conditions was kept in the box for many days or weeks. Number 2, describe leadership traits your cult leader displays to persuade their audience. Jim Jones exemplified several leadership traits that created and kept his flock of brainwashed converts within his cult. Firstly, Jones showed himself to be a charismatic leader and is applauded by many of his former followers for being an excellent orator and having extremely good speaking skills. This is reminiscent of Hitler's uncanny oratory abilities. One of his former followers stated that Jones was the most dynamic speaker that he had ever heard, and it is said that Jones's greatest asset was his ability to determine what listeners wanted to hear and give it to them in a simple language that appealed to them on an almost instinctual level. Secondly, Jim Jones was manipulative and used brainwashing techniques coupled with psychological abuse to control his followers and add to his flock. In 25 years of research by Dr. Zimbardo, he has found that Jones used sophisticated types of compliance, conformity, and obedience training that can be likened to Orwell's scenario in his 1984 fictional book. Jim Jones' specific leadership style can be said to be that of evil leadership. Evil leadership is defined as when the leader, and at least some of his followers, commit atrocities. They use pain as an instrument of power, and the harm done to men, women, and children is severe rather than slight. The harm can be physical, psychological, or both. In Jones' case, it was both. Lastly, Jones had the leadership trait of being authoritative. Jones conditioned his followers through brainwashing and punishment to obey his word without thinking. Obedience to his very whim became habituary, and obedience to his very whim became as habituary as breathing oxygen, and Jim Jones' command were obeyed without a second thought. Jim Jones was committed to being obeyed like a deity. so much that he even had his followers call him Father and later God, as he claimed that he was God on earth. Number 3, determine the leadership skills you need to undermine Jim Jones's influence. It is known that Jim Jones was a charismatic leader, which means that to counter his charisma, I must be willing to lead by asking Jones' followers deep and hard questions that they must answer for themselves. By asking Jones' followers to think for themselves instead of handing them answers, the cult members will begin to break their conditioning depending on Jones for all wisdom. Knowing what questions Jones has left poorly answered and thereby asking his followers to think critically on those questions is done through following Nelson Mandela's 4th lesson of leadership, and that is to know your enemy. By knowing Jones and the manner in which he operates, I will be able to ask his followers questions that will unsettle their faith in him. Being assertive in this manner means that I will have to be a pragmatic leader and ask questions that others fear to ask or are uncomfortable with asking. Pragmatic leaders take initiative and make getting things done their top priority. This means that as a pragmatic leader, I will have to focus on how my team will destroy Jones and free his followers while taking into account the roadblocks necessary to reach the goal of unseating Jones. Other leadership skills helpful to have would be strong communication abilities, the ability to handle long periods of intense stress, open-mindedness towards alternative ideas and opinions, and the ability to form good and long-lasting relationships, as well as the ability to help teams operate coherently. Number 4, devise a plan for how you would prevent another cult leader from seizing power over a large group of people. In regards specifically to Jim Jones' cult, the old saying holds true: cut off the head of the snake and the body withers. Taking down Jim Jones' cult would be done easily through prosecuting the crimes of Jim Jones and his most prominent followers. If Jim Jones were forced to admit that he was not a god, and if he were prosecuted and imprisoned, then without his leadership oversight, his followers would soon realize that he is nothing more than a fallible man, and once that happened, then Jim Jones' cult would quickly die. However, going beyond Jim Jones and preventing another cult in general from forming or another cult leader from seizing power is rather difficult but not impossible. The first step is to be aware of the happenings within one city and in the surrounding areas and knowing how to spot a cult and then dismantling it. One of the ways to spot a cult is to look at a spiritual group and see if there is one central person who decides what is true or false and demands absolute obedience to his spiritual views. A cult will look down upon one questioning their beliefs. However, a religion will welcome the hard questions and will be eager to explain their views based on the religious scriptures. The second aspect of a cult to look for is looking for a spiritual group that attempts to impose rules on non-moral aspects of your life, such as who you can speak to, or where you can shop for groceries, which movies you can see, and what books are appropriate to read, etc. Once a potential cult leader has been spotted, focus on investigating him. Remember that with cults, once you cut off the head of the snake, i.e. prosecute the cult leader, the body quickly dies. Generally speaking, cults are prevented when people have a clear understanding of what brainwashing techniques cults employ and how they are used. People should know how to critically think about what they're being taught spiritually, which means that it is the job of the defenders against cults, such as teachers, to facilitate critical thinking skills among the population. This can be done in school, where critical thinking is highly valued, and where people are encouraged to question everything and believe nothing without proof. When dealing with cults, one must remember that without absolute proof, especially from religious scriptures, in the case of spiritual matters, every statement is a lie. Without absolute proof, every statement is a lie. One should never accept new religions readily and should be critical of them, as most will be cults. In short, cults are best thwarted by the mass education of people in critical thinking skills and by teaching people to not be naive and to be slow to believe everything, especially of spiritual nature. References. Lessons from Jonestown. which is retrieved, which is from the Monitor on Psychology. That's 2003. 2015. Are you an idealist or a pragmatic leader? As from Women on Business. How to avoid cults that may try to convert you, from WikiHow. Bad leadership, what it is, how it happens, and why it matters. That is from Amazon, written by Kellerman. Sex, Socialism, and Child Torture with Reverend Jones, retrieved from Jonestown. It's written by Kinsolving L. Kinsolving T, in 2010, wrote The Sounds of Jim Jones and That Horrendous Laughter Back from the Grave. 2008, Jim Jones' followers enthralled by his skills as a speaker, CNN News. 2014, The Obedience of Jonestown. That is written by Mirza. 2015, Why a Charismatic Leader Can Doom an Organization, retrieved from LinkedIn. And Characteristics of Effective Crisis Leaders. That is by RVTS. No date. 15 Horrific Tactics Jim Jones used to keep his followers on lockdown. Ranker.com. 2016, What is charismatic leadership? Leading through personal conviction. Alright, so 2016 was charismatic leadership leading through personal conviction. That is from stu.edu. I think that's Stanford University. I forget. 2008, Mandela, His 8 Lessons of Leadership. And that is from Ashford. And the specific web link is Underwood. It's written by Stengel.com or Stengel R. Alright, that wraps us up. Have a great one. It's been a pleasure. Bye bye.